The judge delivered a 9-year prison sentence to a child for taking the life of his newborn sister. However, when the boy spoke his final words, everyone in the courtroom was taken aback, leading the judge to reconsider. Miguel Angel Suarez, just 12 years old, walked down the courthouse hallway flanked by officers. His worn blue sneakers, a gift from his mother at the start of the school year, seemed out of place in such a setting. "This way, kid," one of the officers said, his tone a blend of professionalism and quiet compassion. Waiting near the heavy wooden doors, defense attorney Ricardo Mendoza crouched to Miguel's level, whispering, "Remember what we talked about. Stay calm, all right?" Miguel nodded slightly, his gaze never leaving the floor. His small wrists bore marks from the handcuffs, trembling faintly. Inside, conversations halted abruptly as Judge Gabriel Ramirez entered. Known for his unwavering firmness balanced by fairness, Ramirez had never faced a case involving such a young defendant charged with such a grave crime. The courtroom stood in silent respect as he took his seat. The judge adjusted his glasses, reviewing the documents before announcing, "We are here for the sentencing hearing in the case of the state versus Miguel Angel Suarez Morales." In the front row, Elena Morales clung to her husband Carlos's hand. The ordeal of the past weeks had visibly aged them. Elena, her clothes hanging loosely after losing significant weight, whispered, "How am I supposed to be strong when I've lost my baby and might lose my son too?" Carlos held her close, his face etched with quiet despair. Prosecutor Javier Rosales, a meticulous and methodical man, began recounting the events. He detailed how, late one September evening, baby Ana Maria, only 3 weeks old, was found lifeless in her crib. Forensic evidence pointed to asphyxiation, with Miguel's fingerprints found on the pillow used. A neighbor testified to seeing Miguel leave the baby's room near the time of her death. Elena broke into sobs, and Carlos tightened his embrace around her. As Rosales presented the case, Miguel's teacher, Carmen Valdez, slipped into the courtroom, her face lined with concern. She had reported Miguel's recent behavioral changes, his withdrawn demeanor, unexplained tears during recess, details now haunting her as they were used against the boy. Defense attorney Mendoza stood, emphasizing Miguel's age and spotless record prior to the tragedy. "We are talking about a 12-year-old child," he implored, but the judge reminded him this was the sentencing phase. Miguel sat motionless, his eyes locked on his handcuffs, seemingly oblivious to the proceedings. Mendoza leaned in once more, asking softly, "Do you want to say anything before the sentence is read?" Miguel didn't respond, his silence reflecting an inner turmoil. Judge Ramirez reviewed the reports, highlighting Miguel's comprehension of his actions and the crime's severity. Elena swayed in her seat, mimicking the comforting motion of cradling a baby, while Carlos's unblinking gaze stayed fixed on his son, as if searching for answers. As the judge began outlining his decision, sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting a poignant glow over the room. The court had weighed the child's age against the gravity of the crime. Just as the sentence seemed inevitable, the unexpected unfolded. The light briefly illuminated Miguel's face, revealing not a criminal but a small, frightened child, overwhelmed by a world of adult judgment and consequences far beyond his understanding. "Miguel Angel Suarez Morales," the judge's voice cut through the silence, resonating with finality. "This court finds you guilty of first-degree homicide. Considering your age as a mitigating factor, but also recognizing the gravity of your actions, you are sentenced to 9 years in a juvenile detention center." The gavel struck the bench like a thunderclap, shaking the room into silence. Elena collapsed into her husband Carlos's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, while Roberto, standing at the back, covered his face in despair. "No!" cried Carmen, Miguel's teacher, rising to her feet. "He's just a child!" The judge banged the gavel once more. "Order in the court," he commanded. Miguel finally lifted his eyes, scanning the room with an unreadable expression. His gaze lingered momentarily on his uncle Roberto, his face flickering with a hint of something indefinable. Elena cried out, "Miguel!" and tried to rush toward her son, only to be restrained by the officers. "My child!" she sobbed. The judge softened his tone slightly, addressing her directly. "Mrs. Suarez, you will have time to say goodbye before his transfer." As officers moved to escort Miguel out, Dr. Rojas, the forensic psychologist, noticed something unsettling. When Roberto stepped toward the exit, Miguel's body tensed, and his hands began trembling more violently. "The defendant will be transferred this afternoon to San Angel Juvenile Detention Center," the judge announced. "This session is adjourned." The room slowly began to empty, but Dr. Rojas remained seated, observing Miguel. An uncomfortable feeling gnawed at her, something in his eyes, his silence, and his reactions didn't add up. Outside the courtroom, journalists who had been quiet during the session now clustered by the exit, their voices merging into a chaotic hum as they debated the shocking case. Elena moved as if in a trance toward the door, Maria following close behind. "Elena," Maria called. "Wait, you can't just leave like this. Let's wait for the car." Carlos caught Elena by the shoulders, gently but firmly. "Maria's right, my love. There are reporters outside." "What does it matter now?" Elena replied, her voice hollow. "My baby is gone. My Miguel." Her voice broke as tears streamed down her face. Roberto stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty hallway. "I'll take you home," he offered. "My car is in the back parking lot. We can avoid the press." As the family prepared to leave, Attorney Mendoza approached, his briefcase clutched tightly against his chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Suarez," he began, "we need to discuss the appeal process. There are still options." Carlos turned sharply, his voice rising in frustration. "Options? Did you not see what just happened in there? My son didn't even speak. He didn't defend himself." "Exactly," Mendoza replied, lowering his voice. "His silence, his behavior, these could be grounds for an appeal. Dr. Rojas agrees he needs further psychological evaluations." Hearing her name, Dr. Rojas paused in collecting her notes and looked up, her expression tinged with concern. Something about the case still didn't feel right. Miguel's story was far from over, and the true events behind the tragedy remained a mystery, known only to the boy himself. She approached the group, adjusting her thin-framed glasses. "Mr. and Mrs. Suarez," she began with a calm yet firm tone, "there are aspects of Miguel's behavior that deeply trouble me. He doesn't fit the typical profile of a violent child." Carlos, his voice cracking, snapped back. "Then why didn't you say that during the trial?" "I did," the doctor replied evenly. "But without Miguel's cooperation, without him speaking." "My son is not violent," Elena interrupted, her voice trembling. "You don't know him. When Ana Maria was born, he was so excited. He decorated her room with his own drawings and sang lullabies to her." Her voice broke as tears welled in her eyes. Roberto cleared his throat. "Elena, you need to go home and rest. It's been a rough couple of weeks." His words were gentle, yet there was an urgency beneath them. Teacher Carmen, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward hesitantly. I'd like to say something." All eyes turned toward her. Miguel was always a special child, sensitive, protective of his classmates, but the day this happened, he was different. He wasn't himself. "Different how?" asked Dr. Rojas, pulling out her notebook with sudden focus. Carmen hesitated, glancing at Elena with concern. "That day, during recess, he was quieter than usual. I found him sitting alone on the stairs crying. When I asked what was wrong, he just looked at me, and there was so much fear in his eyes." Elena clutched her chest, her face pale. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I mentioned it during my testimony," Carmen answered nervously, twisting her purse in her hands. "But the prosecutor used it as evidence of his erratic behavior. At that moment, the back door swung open, and 2 officers entered, escorting Miguel. The group fell silent, watching as the boy shuffled forward with his head bowed, his small steps measured and hesitant. "My love," Elena cried, trying to reach for him, but Roberto gently restrained her. "Ma'am," one of the officers said respectfully, "you'll be able to see your son before the transfer, but for now, we need to take him to the processing room." Miguel briefly lifted his gaze. Normally a warm brown like his mother's, his eyes now seemed darker under the harsh fluorescent lights. For a fleeting moment, his gaze locked with Roberto's, and his entire body tensed. Dr. Rojas, observing from the side, made a note in her journal, her brow furrowed. "Miguel," Mendoza called softly, "do you want to say anything to your parents?" Silence was his only response. The officers continued escorting him down the long hallway. "I need to go to the bathroom," Elena muttered suddenly, moving away from the group. "I'll go with you," Maria offered, but Roberto intervened. "I'll accompany her," he said quickly, following his sister. Dr. Rojas watched them leave, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. There was something about the family dynamics, something just out of reach, like missing pieces of a puzzle. "Mr. Mendoza," she finally said, turning to the lawyer, "can we speak in private?" The lawyer nodded, and the two walked down the hallway together. Flipping through her notes, Dr. Rojas muttered, "There's something we're not seeing. Something important." "What do you mean?" Mendoza asked, his voice cautious. "Miguel's reactions, his selective silence, the way his body responds to certain stimuli. I've worked with traumatized children for 20 years, and there are patterns." Their conversation was cut short by a piercing scream from the women's restroom. "Elena!" Carlos shouted, racing toward the sound, followed by Maria and others. When they reached the restroom, they found Elena on her knees, clutching a crumpled photo of Ana Maria. Roberto was at her side, trying to comfort her. "My baby!" Elena wailed. "My babies! How could this happen?" Dr. Rojas stood in the doorway, her mind racing. There was something in the way Miguel had looked at Roberto earlier, something about the uncle's role in the family that didn't sit right. But for now, they were only suspicions. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the courthouse, a 12-year-old boy was being processed for a crime he may not have fully understood or committed. As evening fell over the city, Miguel Ángel Suárez Morales carried a secret far heavier than the chains on his wrists. 2 weeks later, Miguel had been transferred to the San Angel Juvenile Detention Center, a stark and foreboding structure on the outskirts of the city. Despite the passage of time, his case remained the focus of intense public debate. "How is he eating?" Elena asked nervously, sitting across from social worker Sandra Gutierrez in the center's visiting room. Her fingers played absently with the edge of her black shawl, the same one she had worn at Ana Maria's funeral. Sandra flipped through her notes, pausing before answering. "He's improved a little. At least now he eats about half of his meals," Sandra said cautiously. "And he still isn't talking?" Carlos leaned forward, the dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless nights. "I'm afraid not," Sandra replied with a hint of regret. "But Dr. Torres, our resident psychologist, has observed certain changes in his behavior." "What kind of changes?" Elena asked, her voice taut with anxiety. "He started drawing mainly during therapy sessions," Sandra explained, pulling out a few sheets from her folder. "They're quite intense for a child his age." She placed the drawings on the table, revealing dark figures and ominous shadows, looming over what appeared to be a crib. Elena choked back a sob at the sight of them. Mendoza, the attorney, broke his silence. "Miss Gutierrez, do you believe Miguel is ready to appear at next week's review hearing?" "Honestly, I'm not sure," Sandra admitted. "But Judge Ramirez has insisted on his presence." Just then, the door opened, and Dr. Torres entered hurriedly. "Excuse the interruption," he said, adjusting his glasses, "but I think you should see this." The group followed him to an observation room with a one-way mirror. Through the glass, they could see Miguel sitting at a table surrounded by papers and crayons. Dr. Rojas was already inside, watching intently. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Rojas asked without taking her eyes off the boy. "About an hour," Torres replied. "It started right after we informed him about the upcoming hearing." Miguel was drawing furiously, his small hands moving without pause. Occasionally, he would stop, scrutinize his work, then crumple the paper with frustration before starting again. "Can I?" Elena began, her voice trembling. "Can I go in to see him?" Sandra and Torres exchanged uneasy glances. "I'm not sure this is the best time," Sandra began. "Please," Elena pleaded. "He's my son." After a moment of hesitation, Torres relented. "All right, but only you, Mrs. Suarez, and the session must remain under observation." Elena entered the room quietly and sat across from her son. Miguel didn't look up, his focus entirely on his drawing. "Miguel, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mom is here." For a brief moment, Miguel's pencil stilled, but he quickly resumed his frantic sketching. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Elena leaned forward, trying to see the paper. Miguel immediately shielded it with his arms. Behind the glass, Dr. Rojas jotted down notes. Protective behavior over drawings. Possible indication of a hidden secret. "My love," Elena continued gently, "we're all so worried about you. Your dad, your teachers. Even Uncle Roberto asks about you every day." At the mention of Roberto, Miguel's pencil snapped in half. Dr. Rojas leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Did you see that?" she asked. "What?" Carlos responded. "His reaction to mentioning his uncle. It's the second time I've noticed something like this," Dr. Rojas said, narrowing her eyes. Inside the room, Elena pressed on. "Miguel, if there's anything you want to tell me, anything at all, please, my love." For the first time, Miguel looked up, his eyes meeting his mother's. His lips quivered as if he were about to speak, but before he could, the door burst open. "Elena, I'm sorry, but this is urgent," Roberto said, stepping into the room. "There's been a problem at home." The effect was immediate. Miguel jumped up, knocking over his chair, and backed into a corner, his body trembling. "Miguel!" Elena stood to comfort him, but Roberto grabbed her arm. "Elena, please, there's been a fire in the kitchen. The firefighters are there. They need you to sign something." "I don't care about the kitchen," Elena shouted, trying to free herself. "My son needs me." "Elena, please," Roberto insisted, pulling her toward the door. In the corner, Miguel cowered, his eyes fixed on his uncle with a mix of terror and something deeper. Anger. "Sir," Dr. Torres interjected firmly. "This is a controlled session. You need to leave." The tension in the room was suffocating. Roberto hesitated, his grip still on Elena, while Miguel continued trembling in the corner. Dr. Rojas, observing from behind the glass, felt her suspicions deepen. There was something more to Roberto's presence, something that didn't add up. As Miguel's secret weighed heavier with each passing moment, the cracks in the family's fragile facade began to show. "You can't burst in like this. This is a controlled environment," Dr. Torres scolded. "I'm sorry," Roberto replied, his tone hurried, "but it's a family emergency." Elena looked between her brother and her son, her emotions tugging her in two directions. "Miguel, my love, I'll be back soon, okay? Mom has to..." That was when it happened. The stress, anguish, and sudden interruption proved too much for Elena. Her eyes rolled back, and her body collapsed. "Elena!" Several voices shouted at once. Carlos and Roberto rushed to catch her as Dr. Torres called for emergency services. Amidst the chaos, something remarkable occurred. Miguel stepped forward, his lips moving. Dr. Rojas was the first to notice. "Everyone quiet," she ordered. "Miguel is trying to speak." The room fell silent except for Elena's faint moans as she began to regain consciousness. Don't. Miguel's voice, hoarse from weeks of silence, barely escaped his lips. Don't touch her. Everyone froze. Roberto, who was cradling Elena's head, stared at him, confused. What did you say, Miguel? Dr. Rojas approached carefully. Miguel, what are you trying to tell us? But the moment passed. Miguel retreated back to his corner, silence once again shielding him. The paramedics arrived, quickly assessing Elena. We need to take her to the hospital for a complete evaluation, one of them announced. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. I'll go with her, Roberto offered immediately. No, Dr. Rojas interjected firmly. Mr. Suarez will go with his wife. You, Mr. Roberto, and I need to talk. Roberto looked taken aback. Talk about what? About your nephew's reaction to your presence, Dr. Rojas said, her gaze unwavering. And about those drawings. As Elena was wheeled out on a stretcher, Miguel remained in his corner, clutching one of his drawings tightly. Miguel, Dr. Rojas said softly, crouching to his level. Can I see that drawing? Miguel hesitated, then slowly extended the crumpled paper to her. Dr. Rojas unfolded it carefully. The image made her breath catch. A dark figure loomed over a crib, with a smaller shadow watching from the background. Dr. Torres, Dr. Rojas called without looking up. We need to schedule an emergency session, and I need you to contact Judge Ramirez immediately. Why? Roberto demanded, taking a step toward her. What's going on? Dr. Rojas looked up, her expression sharp. That's exactly what we're going to find out, Mr. Roberto. In his corner, Miguel began to rock slightly, his lips moving as if rehearsing words he wasn't yet ready to say. The silence that had shielded him for weeks was beginning to crack, and through those cracks, a haunting truth struggled to emerge. The hours after Elena's collapse were a blur of activity at the detention center. Dr. Rojas arranged for a private room to question Roberto, while Dr. Torres stayed with Miguel. I don't understand why I need to stay, Roberto protested, shifting uncomfortably in the small office. Your sister is in the hospital with her husband, Dr. Rojas replied, her tone cool as she arranged her notes. And what I need to discuss with you is equally urgent. Sandra Gutierrez, the social worker, entered with a thick folder. I have the visit records you requested, Doctor. Excellent, Dr. Rojas said, nodding. She turned to Roberto. Mr. Roberto, can you explain exactly what your role was in the household after Ana Maria's birth? Roberto sighed, visibly uncomfortable. I already explained this during the trial. I moved in temporarily to help with the baby. Elena needed support, especially at night. And where did you sleep? Dr. Rojas asked, her voice even. In the guest room, Roberto replied. Then, after a slight hesitation, he added, next to... He stopped, swallowing hard. Next to Ana Maria's room. Dr. Rojas made a note. And Miguel? Where was his room? Across the hallway, Roberto answered, his voice tightening. Where are you going with this? Before Dr. Rojas could respond, a knock came at the door. Dr. Torres entered, looking concerned. Sorry to interrupt, but Miguel is behaving differently. He started writing. Writing? Dr. Rojas stood immediately. What is he writing? I'm not sure, Torres replied. He won't let anyone see the paper, but he's been at it non-stop for half an hour. Roberto rose from his chair. I should leave now. You're not going anywhere, Dr. Rojas said firmly. Sandra, please stay with Mr. Roberto. Dr. Torres and I will go check on Miguel. In the observation room, Miguel sat at a table with a notebook in front of him. His hand moved quickly across the pages, writing the same words repeatedly. Did anyone try to approach him? Dr. Rojas asked. Yes, a nurse replied, but he gets very upset if anyone tries to see what he's writing. Dr. Rojas observed Miguel through the glass. His posture was tense, protective, as if guarding a terrible secret. I'm going in, she announced, but make sure Roberto stays far from this area. Torres nodded. and Dr. Rojas entered the room quietly. "Hello, Miguel," she said softly, keeping her distance. "Can I sit with you for a while?" Miguel didn't respond but showed no signs of distress, so she carefully sat at the opposite end of the table. "You know," she began, pulling out the drawing Miguel had given her earlier. "I've been thinking about this drawing. The small figure watching, is that you?" Miguel's hand paused briefly but then resumed writing. "Sometimes," Dr. Rojas continued, "when we see things that scare us, our minds try to protect us by making us stay quiet. But silence can feel very heavy, can't it?" Miguel's writing became larger, his strokes more frantic. "Miguel," Dr. Rojas said gently, "would you like me to read what you're writing? Maybe we can read it together." For the first time, Miguel looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. I can't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why not, Miguel? What's stopping you?" He said he'd hurt Mom," Miguel stammered, his words fragmented but clear. Behind the glass, Torres held his breath. It was the longest sentence Miguel had spoken in weeks. "Who said that, Miguel?" Dr. Rojas asked, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. Miguel glanced toward the door, his expression terrified, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "No one can hurt you here," Dr. Rojas reassured him. "You're safe." Slowly, Miguel pushed the notebook toward her. On the pages, written over and over, were the words, "I'm sorry, Ana Maria. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. I'm sorry." Dr. Rojas's eyes narrowed as she noticed the subtle shift in the phrasing. The final sentences read, "I'm sorry, I couldn't stop him." "Miguel," she said gently, "who couldn't you stop?" Before he could answer, raised voices echoed outside the room. "I demand to see my nephew," Roberto's voice rang out. "I'm his family." Miguel recoiled, shrinking into his chair, terror etched across his face. "Don't let him in," Dr. Rojas shouted toward the glass, but the damage was already done. Miguel's body tensed, and he retreated into silence, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Dr. Rojas stood abruptly. "Torres!" she called. "Contact Judge Ramirez and the police immediately. We have enough to begin a new investigation." As she exited the room, she glanced back at Miguel. He had returned to his drawing, but the subject had changed. This time, he sketched a closed door with a small figure sitting in front of it, as if standing guard. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the truth was beginning to emerge. But Dr. Rojas knew that the revelations ahead would be even more harrowing than the silence they replaced. The courtroom was packed for the second hearing. The case, now a national sensation, had taken a shocking turn with new developments in the investigation. Judge Ramirez adjusted his glasses, reviewing the thick file in front of him. The days leading up to the hearing had been intense. Emergency psychological evaluations, new testimony, and unsettling drawings were now part of the case. "Where's Roberto?" Elena whispered to Carlos. "He said he'd come," Carlos replied, noticing how pale his wife still looked after her hospital stay. "Maybe he's on his way." In the front row, Dr. Rojas sat beside Dr. Torres, frantically reviewing her notes. She had worked tirelessly to prepare her testimony, knowing her words could change the case's trajectory. "The session is now open," Judge Ramirez announced, striking his gavel. "We are here for the review hearing of the State versus Miguel Angel Suarez Morales," Judge Ramirez announced, his tone serious. "I understand the defense has new evidence to present." Attorney Mendoza stood up. "That's correct, Your Honor. We request that Dr. Patricia Rojas present her recent findings." "Proceed," the judge granted with a nod. Dr. Rojas walked to the stand, the sound of her heels echoing in the hushed courtroom. After taking the oath, she arranged her documents before meeting Mendoza's gaze. "Dr. Rojas," Mendoza began, Could you explain to the court what led you to request this emergency hearing? Of course, Dr. Rojas replied, adjusting her glasses. Over the past few weeks, I've observed patterns in Miguel's behavior indicating a deeper and more complex trauma than initially assessed. Could you elaborate? Miguel displays signs of what we call selective traumatic silence. Unlike common selective mutism, this condition is directly linked to a specific traumatic event or series of events that the individual feels unable to disclose. Prosecutor Rosales stood. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant's psychological state was thoroughly examined during the initial trial. Your Honor, Dr. Rojas interjected before the judge could respond. I have evidence that was unavailable during the initial trial. The judge considered this for a moment. Continue, but please stick to the new findings. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Rojas pulled several drawings from her folder. These drawings were made by Miguel in recent days. They consistently depict a threatening figure looming over a crib, with a smaller figure, representing Miguel, watching from a distance. And what does this suggest? Mendoza asked. It suggests that Miguel wasn't the perpetrator of the crime, but rather a witness, Dr. Rojas explained. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Elena stifled a sob, clutching Carlos's arm tightly. Additionally, Dr. Rojas continued, Miguel exhibits pronounced physical reactions to certain stimuli. Her words were interrupted as the courtroom doors burst open. Roberto entered, his face flushed and covered in sweat. Apologies for the delay. Traffic, he said breathlessly. The effect was immediate. Miguel, who had been sitting quietly beside his lawyer, began to tremble visibly. Your Honor, Dr. Rojas leaned forward. This is precisely what I was referring to. Observe Miguel's reaction to his uncle's presence. Judge Ramirez narrowed his eyes, his attention shifting between Miguel and Roberto. Doctor, the prosecutor said, standing once more, are you implying that the defendant's uncle is somehow involved in this case? Objection, Mendoza shot back. Speculation. Sustained, the judge replied, raising a hand to silence further interruptions. Dr. Rojas, proceed with your evidence. Dr. Rojas opened another folder. During recent sessions, Miguel began writing a single phrase repeatedly. I'm sorry, Ana Maria. I couldn't stop him. And what is significant about that? The prosecutor asked. The wording changed, Dr. Rojas explained. Initially, Miguel wrote, stop you. In later writings, it became stop him. Coupled with his reactions to his uncle's presence, this indicates a pattern. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned toward Roberto, whose face had gone pale. This is absurd, Roberto exclaimed, standing abruptly. He's my nephew. I helped care for Ana Maria. Order, Judge Ramirez demanded, striking his gavel. Then a small, trembling voice broke the silence. I was protecting her. The room froze. Elena covered her mouth with her hands, and Carlos leaned forward, barely breathing. Miguel, Dr. Rojas said gently. Who were you protecting? Miguel's gaze darted around the room, lingering on familiar faces before landing on Roberto. His uncle took a step forward, but court officers immediately blocked his path. That night, Miguel began, his voice shaking. I saw someone in her room. In whose room, Miguel? The judge asked softly. Ana Maria's, Miguel whispered, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't the first time I saw him come in at night. Who did you see, Miguel? Dr. Rojas pressed, her voice steady despite the tension. Miguel shut his eyes tightly. Uncle Roberto, he finally said. I saw him before, with Maria Jose. Your 4-year-old sister? Dr. Rojas clarified, her tone filled with quiet dread. Elena let out a strangled cry, her body shaking as Carlos stood, rage contorting his face. "Lies!" Roberto shouted, trying to move toward Miguel. "He's lying!" "Restrain that man," the judge ordered as officers grabbed Roberto, who continued shouting. "Elena, tell them I took care of the children." Elena remained motionless, staring at her son. Years of overlooked signs and ignored warnings weighed on her like a crushing wave. "Miguel," Dr. Rojas continued gently amidst the chaos. "What happened that night with Ana Maria?" I tried to stop him," Miguel sobbed. "But he was stronger. When he left, Ana Maria wasn't breathing anymore." A stunned silence enveloped the courtroom. Roberto's protests grew weaker as the weight of Miguel's words hung heavy in the air. The truth, long buried, had finally surfaced. Elena's scream echoed through the courtroom. "No! No! No!" "I just tried to help her," Miguel continued, his voice trembling. "With the pillow, like on TV. I tried to make her breathe again, but it didn't work." Judge Ramirez removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. In his 3 decades on the bench, he had rarely witnessed anything so heart-wrenching. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Rosales said, standing, "I request an immediate investigation into these accusations." "Granted," the judge replied firmly. "Officers, take Mr. Roberto into custody." "Prosecutor, I want a warrant to search his phone, computer, and any additional devices immediately." Roberto struggled as the officers restrained him. "You can't believe him. He's the one you convicted. He's a killer." "Silence," the judge ordered, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "Mr. Roberto Morales, you are under arrest pending investigation for homicide and child abuse." As Roberto was escorted out, Miguel looked up at his parents for the first time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just wanted to protect them." Elena ran to her son, and this time, the officers didn't stop her. She wrapped him in her arms, both of them sobbing uncontrollably. My child," she repeated, rocking him gently, as if he were a baby once more. Dr. Rojas discreetly wiped a tear from her cheek. "Your Honor," she said, turning to the judge, "I request Miguel's immediate release and psychological support for the entire family." Judge Ramirez nodded gravely. "Granted, and Doctor, thank you for not giving up on him." As the room began to empty, the weight of the truth, hidden behind Miguel's silence, finally came to light. It was a truth darker and more painful than anyone had imagined, but one that would allow justice to take its rightful course. Prosecutor Rosales approached the judge quickly. "Your Honor," he said in a low voice, "the police found something on Roberto Morales' phone. Apparently there was a second device hidden in his car." Judge Ramirez's expression darkened. "Proceed with the investigation, prosecutor, and I want police protection for the Suarez family, especially Maria Jose." In the center of the room, Carlos had joined Elena and Miguel in an embrace, the 3 of them forming a protective circle, as if shielding themselves from the horrors that had just come to light. "Mr. and Mrs. Suarez," Dr. Rojas interrupted gently, "we need to take Miguel and Maria Jose for evaluations." Miguel clung tightly to his mother. "I don't want to be separated from them." Dr. Torres, who had just entered, reassured him. "That won't be necessary. We can conduct the evaluations at the hospital, with your parents present." Elena, her eyes red and swollen, looked up. "Is Maria Jose okay? I left her with the neighbor." "The police are already at your house," Rosales assured her. 2 officers are escorting her to the hospital right now." Teacher Carmen, who had been silently observing, approached hesitantly. "Miguel," she said softly, "do you remember that day at school when I found you crying on the stairs?" Miguel nodded slowly. "You wanted to tell me something that day, didn't you?" Miguel swallowed hard. I wanted to tell you about Uncle Roberto, but he said he would hurt Mom if I did." Carlos clenched his fists. rage flashing in his eyes. "I'm going to kill him." "Mr. Suarez," the judge said firmly, "I understand your anger, but your family needs you now more than ever." Sandra Gutierrez, reviewing her notes nearby, stepped forward. "There's something else we should investigate," she said. "The records show that Roberto stayed at the house even before Ana Maria's birth." Elena paled. "Yes, he offered to help when I was pregnant. He said I looked tired." "Oh my God," Carmen whispered, her eyes widening. "I just remembered Maria Jose's absences. There were days she didn't come to school because she was sick, and it was always when Roberto stayed to help." Carlos's voice broke as he completed the thought. "And he stayed to take care of her." Miguel, trembling, spoke again. I tried to stay awake to watch, but sometimes I couldn't." "My love," Elena said, hugging her son tightly, "none of this is your fault. None of it." Judge Ramirez returned to the courtroom, his face grave. "The police have found substantial evidence," he announced. "The case is being transferred to the Special Crimes Unit, and..." He hesitated before adding, "It appears that Roberto Morales may be connected to other similar cases." The room fell into a heavy silence as the enormity of the situation became clear. "What happens now?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Now," Dr. Rojas said, "we focus on healing one step at a time." Miguel, looking at the drawings scattered on the table, the ones that had uncovered the truth, picked up a pencil and began a new drawing. This time it was a family, his family, standing together under a bright sun. The path to healing would be long and arduous, but for the first time they could walk it together, free from the crushing weight of silence. In the following days, Miguel's case sparked widespread reforms in the juvenile justice system. Judge Ramirez convened a special meeting with his peers, declaring, "What happened to Miguel Suarez must never happen again." At home, the Suarez family began their journey toward recovery. Dr. Rojas initiated an intensive family therapy program to help them rebuild. "Can I hang my new drawings in Maria Jose's room?" Miguel asked one day, holding colorful pictures he had created during art therapy. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "Of course, my love. Where do you want to put them?" "In her room," Miguel replied, so she has nice things to look at before going to sleep." Detective Gonzalez continued to visit regularly, with updates on the investigation, ensuring that the Suarez family remained informed and protected. Though the scars of their ordeal would never fully fade, the Suarez family found strength in each other, determined to move forward as one. One afternoon, while having coffee with Elena and Carlos in their kitchen, Detective Gonzalez shared important news in a hushed voice, ensuring the children couldn't overhear. "We've identified 3 more members of the network," she began. "Roberto is cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence." "I don't care what deal he makes," Carlos said firmly, gripping his mug, "as long as he's never able to hurt another child again." "He won't," the detective assured. "The charges he faces will keep him in prison for life." Meanwhile, at school, change was also underway. Teacher Carmen had implemented a new program focused on personal safety and encouraging students to speak up when something felt wrong. "Miguel," she called after class one day, "would you help me with a special project?" "What kind of project?" Miguel asked curiously. "We're preparing a presentation about courage and truth. I thought it might help if you shared some of your drawings." Miguel paused, considering her request. "Do you think it would help other kids?" "I'm certain it would," Carmen replied with a kind smile. Nearby, Dr. Rojas, who had arrived to pick up Miguel for his weekly session, overheard the conversation. She approached and gently added, "Miguel, remember, you're not obligated to do anything that makes you uncomfortable." "I know," Miguel replied, his voice steady, "but I want to help. I don't want other kids to go through what I did." That evening, during a quiet family dinner, Maria Jose asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Mommy, can Ana Maria see us from heaven?" A heavy silence fell over the table. Elena looked to Dr. Rojas, who was dining with them, for guidance. Before anyone could respond, Miguel answered, "I think she can, and I think she's happy now, because we're safe." Maria Jose smiled at his response and returned to her meal. Elena reached under the table and squeezed Miguel's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Later that night, as Dr. Rojas prepared to leave, Miguel stopped her at the door. "Doctor," he asked hesitantly, "do you think I'll ever stop feeling guilty?" "Guilty about what, Miguel?" "For not speaking up sooner. Maybe if I had said something when it started with Maria Jose." Dr. Rojas knelt to his eye level, her voice gentle but firm. "Miguel, listen to me. You were a child facing something terrifying. You did everything you could to protect your family. The only person guilty here is Roberto." "But," Miguel began, but Dr. Rojas interrupted. "No buts. Every time you stayed awake to watch, every time you tried to shield your sisters, every drawing you made to express what you couldn't say out loud, those were acts of love and courage." Miguel nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've been thinking. When I grow up, I want to help kids like me." "Like me?" Dr. Rojas asked, her eyes moistening. "Yes, I want to help kids who are too scared to tell the truth." Dr. Rojas smiled, her voice filled with emotion. "You'd be incredible at that, Miguel. You already have a brave and wise heart." From the kitchen, Elena and Carlos watched the exchange, their own tears falling silently. Their son, who had carried such a heavy burden, was now thinking of helping others. That night, while the house slept, Miguel slipped quietly into Ana Maria's old room, now a playroom. On the dresser, a photo of his baby sister smiled from a frame adorned with his drawings. "I did it, Ana Maria," he whispered. "I told the truth. And even though I miss you so much, I know you can rest now. I don't have to keep secrets anymore." With those words, Miguel let go of the weight that had pressed on his small shoulders for so long. In the days that followed, Miguel's case became a catalyst for change. Schools, courts, and families began to implement better safeguards for children. Judge Ramirez convened meetings with legal experts declaring, "What happened to Miguel must never happen again." At home, the Suarez family focused on healing. Dr. Rojas introduced an intensive therapy program to help them rebuild their lives. "Can I hang my new drawings in Maria Jose's room?" Miguel asked one afternoon, showing Elena a series of colorful pictures he'd made during therapy. "Of course, my love. Where do you want to put them?" Elena asked. "In her room, so she has happy things to see before she goes to sleep," he said with a smile. Detective Gonzalez visited regularly to update the family on the investigation, ensuring their continued safety. Though the path to healing was long, the Suarez family walked it together. Miguel, holding his parents' hands and with his little sister by his side, finally stepped into the light, leaving behind the shadows that had haunted him. The truth had triumphed over fear, and while nothing could bring Ana Maria back, her memory was honored with justice and love.